Welcome to the Pop Culture Diary. This is your go-to spot for trends, gossip, and throwbacks. I'm your host, Paige, and each week we're flipping through the pages of pop culture history. We'll talk about everything from neon-soaked 80s nights to the wild early days of the 2000s and beyond. You can expect the fashions, the music, the movies, the biggest news headlines, the scandals, and basically everything that had us talking, laughing, and obsessing. So grab some snacks, get cozy, and let's rewind the pages of time. Hey, dear diary friends. Our first stop, the front page. 1983 was a year when the world could not sit still. Cold War tension, space dreams, invasions, and heartbreak. Let's flip open the news section of our diary and see what made the headlines. All right, buckle up. 1983 wasn't just living in the Cold War, it was thriving in it. The year started with Ronald Reagan announcing his Strategic Defense Initiative, quickly nicknamed Star Wars. The idea? A futuristic space laser missile shield to protect America from Soviet nukes. The press loved it. Scientists weren't so sure, and comedians everywhere thanked Reagan for the free material. Speaking of Cold War tension, if you wanted to sleep easy in 1983, too bad. On September 1st, 1983, Flight 007, a Korean Airlines Boeing 747, was flying from New York to Anchorage to Seoul. It accidentally deviated from its flight path and entered Soviet airspace near Sakhalin Island, and the Soviets shot down the Korean Airlines Flight 007 and nearly triggered an actual nuclear crisis. The Soviets scrambled fighter jets, and after some warnings that were allegedly not noticed by KAL 007's crew, they launched missiles. The plane was destroyed, and all 269 people aboard were killed. The incident significantly escalated Cold War tensions. The U.S. government called it a deliberate act. The Soviet side claimed navigational error and alleged it might have been a spy plane. It became a media and diplomatic flashpoint. Over in living rooms, movies like War Games and the TV film The Day After leaned hard into nuclear anxiety because nothing says fun family movie night like imagining the apocalypse in Kansas. Not everything was doom and gloom, though. Sally Ride was part of the 1978 astronaut group, the first group NASA accepted that included women. Before that, astronaut qualifications excluded women in certain roles. On June 18, 1983, Sally Ride launched aboard Space Shuttle Challenger STS-7 and became the first American woman to fly in space. She was a mission specialist helping deploy commercial communication satellites for Canada and Indonesia, and using the shuttle's robotic arm to retrieve a satellite. Suddenly, astronaut wasn't just a boys' club anymore, and little girls everywhere finally had a hero in a NASA jumpsuit. The year wasn't all inspirational either. Tragedy struck on October 23, 1983. A massive suicide truck bombing targeted U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut, Ramlet El Beida, as a part of a multinational peacekeeping force in Lebanon during its civil war. 241 U.S. servicemen were killed in that blast, making it the single deadliest day for U.S. Marines since World War II. Also, a simultaneous attack on French barracks killed 58 soldiers. These moments were very shocking, one that showed just how unstable the world stage really was. And if you thought things were quiet closer to home, no. In October, the U.S. launched an invasion of Grenada to restore order. Depending on which country's newspaper you were reading, it was either a bold act of heroism or a clumsy overreach. Meanwhile, the celebrity meets politics pipeline was alive and well. Jane Fonda kept making headlines for her activism, much to the dismay of conservatives. Harry Belafonte and other stars also stepped into politics, proving once again that in the 80s, being an entertainer didn't mean staying in your lane. 1983 was the kind of year where the world felt like it was one bad decision away from disaster. But at least America had lasers, astronauts, and Hollywood stars trying to save the day. In 1983, there were new shows, bold characters, and battle royale time slots. The tubes were alive, and so were viewers' remotes. Picture this. It's 1983, and the glow of the TV isn't just background noise anymore. TV shows were a clear the calendar type of event. Families are sitting around the TV set, tuning into shows that will become household names, and saying goodbye to a few longtime favorites. Let's start with the big goodbye. On February the 28th, 1983, more than 100 million people watched the final episode of MASH. That made it the most watched TV broadcast in American history at that time. Think about that. Half the country all glued to the same farewell. When Hawkeye said goodbye, so did we. But thankfully, television wasn't just closing doors, it was throwing open new ones too. NBC had this quirky little sitcom called Cheers with an all-star cast. Some of the stars included Ted Danson as Sam Malone, Shelley Long as Diane Chambers, George Wendt as Norm Peterson, Woody Harrelson as Woody Boyd, Rhea Perlman as Carla Tortelli, John Ratzenberger as Cliff Calvin, Kirstie Alley as Rebecca Howe, Bebe Neuwirth as Lily Sternin, Kelsey Grammer as Frasier Crane, and many others who would become some of the biggest household names. Cheers actually premiered in late 82, but in 83 it started to gain traction. The show was set in a Boston bar where everybody knows your name, but it didn't explode right away in the ratings department. In fact, it almost got canceled, but critics loved it, and by the time the Emmys rolled around, Cheers was walking away with 4 trophies. Sometimes the underdog gets the last laugh. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you had pure adrenaline-fueled chaos with the A-Team. A band of renegade Vietnam vets blowing stuff up, helping the helpless, and making Mr. T into a full-blown pop culture icon. Today, he's 91 years old, and we're still catching ourselves saying, "I pity the fool," which actually originated from his role in Rocky III in 1982, but it stuck around and became one of the most famous lines of all time that he would say in different roles and commercials as well. But back to the show. The A-Team was perfect if you wanted explosions, catchphrases, and a van so recognizable it was practically a character itself. It was a weekly must watch. As far as the actors in this TV show, and apologies for any mispronunciation of names, you had Dwight Schultz, George Peppard, Dirk Benedict, Mr. T, Melinda Kalia, John Ashley, Marla Heasley, Tanya Baker, Robert Vaughn, Hunt Stockwell, Eddie Velez, Tim Dunnigan, Lance Legault, Bill Dyer, Jack Ging, Carl Franklin, Sergio Calderon, Jack Crucian, William Lucking, and many more. Television in 1983 was almost rebellious. Gone were the days when a sitcom or drama would coast on one-note formulas. Audiences were demanding more grit, more flash, more bite. The networks, well, they were scrambling to keep up. Take Knight Rider. This was not just another action show. David Hasselhoff may have been the star on the posters, but let's be honest, the real celebrity was a black Pontiac Trans Am named Kit. This wasn't just any car. Kit was bulletproof, could turbo boost over any obstacle in its way, and had a sassy AI voice provided by William Daniels. Do you remember who that is? He is the William Daniels who would later teach Corey Matthews life lessons as Mr. Feeney in Boy Meets World. Okay, back to Knight Rider. This show was America's techno fantasy that cruised its way into prime time, mingling the sleek style of futuristic escapism and leather jacket cool. It was proof that the 1980s obsession with technology wasn't just happening in Silicon Valley. It was hitting the living room TV set. And then there was Saint Elsewhere. If Knight Rider was shiny and futuristic, Saint Elsewhere was its messy, real-world equalizer. Set in the fictional St. Eligius Hospital in Boston, it gave viewers a chance to see doctors who were not miracle workers, but flawed, exhausted human beings trying to do their best in a crumbling hospital. There were no easy resolutions, no perfect heroes. The show was just raw, sometimes dismal, and often presented darkly funny medical stories that felt uncomfortably close to real life. The cast was stacked. A young Denzel Washington before movie stardom, Howie Mandel before the game show Suits, David Morse, Ed Begley Jr., and guess who else? William Daniels. He was pulling double duty that year with Knight Rider and this show. St. Elsewhere was gritty, experimental, and not afraid to break the rules. And little did people at home know, it would eventually end with one of the most shocking and still debated finales in television history. Maybe the most telling show of the moment was Family Ties. Imagine two ex-hippie parents raising a Reagan-worshipping son in the middle of suburban Ohio. That's the premise. On paper, Stephen and Elise Keaton, the peace and love liberals, should have been the main draw, but the real scene stealer was their son, Alex P. Keaton, played by Michael J. Fox. With his quick wit, sharp tongue, and unapologetic love for money and Ronald Reagan, Alex became the voice of a new generation. A generation that wasn't interested in peace signs and protest songs, but in Wall Street and personal success. The character was supposed to be secondary. Instead, Michael J. Fox's charm launched him right into stardom, turning Family Ties into must-see TV, and Michael J. Fox into an Emmy-winning megastar. Back in the 80s, television was where America could escape with talking cars, confront harsh realities in hospitals, or laugh nervously as families argued about politics over dinner. In 1983, television was starting to look a lot more like the real world. At times, it would also look like a version of the world we wished we lived in. If the small screen was experimenting in 1983, the big screen was doubling down on size, spectacle, and sequels were booming. This was the year when Hollywood realized it could turn movies into franchises and franchises into money-printing machines. Storytelling was still there, sure, but box office influence and energy was about recognizable characters, big special effects, and really the intensity of suspense or curiosity that made people line up around the block and even make new friends over shared interests. Going to the movie theater in general was like its own kind of party. Let's start with the obvious, overwhelming force of Return of the Jedi. By the time it hit theaters in May of '83, people had been waiting 3 years to see how George Lucas's space saga would end. Would Luke face down Darth Vader? Would Han Solo survive his carbonite deep freeze? Would Princess Leia ever get to wear pants again? The film gave what fans wanted, an epic finale with lightsabers, space battles, and yes, Ewoks. Love them or hate them, those furry little rebel warriors helped the movie rake in nearly $500 million worldwide. The merchandising machine exploded too. There were action figures, lunchboxes, bed sheets, you name it. Return of the Jedi was not just a movie. It was a huge celebratory gathering of fans that proved sequels could dominate just as much as originals. Speaking of sequels, 1983 also brought us Superman 3. Now, if Return of the Jedi was the gold standard for sequels, Superman 3 was, let's say, an experimentation. Christopher Reeve was still a beloved Man of Steel, but the style swayed pretty hard into slapstick, thanks to the addition of Richard Pryor as a computer programmer sidekick. Those who watched were a little bewildered. Was this a superhero legendary saga or a comedy sketch? The result was a film that's remembered more for its weirdness and Richard Pryor's charm than for keeping Superman's momentum alive. Still, it was a sign of Hollywood trying to juggle tone, performance, and star power in new ways. But the sequels didn't stop there. The 13th James Bond film, Octopussy, arrived with Roger Moore still in the tux. Roger Moore was in his mid-50s by then, and some critics were raising eyebrows at his age, but the movie leaned into camp and globe-trotting extravaganza. You had circuses, Fabergé eggs, and nuclear plots. It was something that allowed you to escape the real world for a while. And here's the kicker. 1983 wasn't just the year of one Bond movie. Sean Connery returned as 007 in Never Say Never Again, a non-official Bond flick produced outside the usual studio system. So for a brief moment, audiences had dueling Bonds, 2 tuxedos, 2 martinis, shaken, not stirred. Okay, so beyond sequels, 1983 gave us a few surprise hits that proved originality was not dead. Flashdance came out of nowhere with its bold and ballsy Pittsburgh setting. If you haven't seen it, it's a classic must-see. Imagine steel mill workers by day, dancers by night vibe, and that iconic soundtrack with the songs What a Feeling and Maniac practically influenced the whole year in music videos. It made Jennifer Beals a star, even though her dancing was often done by doubles and turned leg warmers into a fashion statement. Comedy also ruled in 1983. Chevy Chase secured his status as the king of bumbling dads with National Lampoon's Vacation. This movie is a road trip disaster comedy that felt both painfully relatable and outrageously ridiculous. Directed by Harold Ramis and written by John Hughes, it was the start of a franchise that would follow the Griswolds for decades. Meanwhile, Eddie Murphy, who was already blowing up from Saturday Night Live, took his star power to the next level with Trading Places. Pairing him with Dan Aykroyd in a comedy about Wall Street scheming and class swaps, Eddie Murphy proved he could command the big screen just as easily as he had late-night TV. He also came out with his comedy stand-up special, Delirious, that year. Drama was not forgotten either. Terms of Endearment had audiences ugly crying in theaters with its story of a mother and daughter trying to find their way through love, loss, and heartbreak. It swept the Oscars, winning Best Picture, Best Actress for Shirley MacLaine, and Best Director for James L. Brooks. The way Terms of Endearment was so emotional, it balanced out the year of over-the-top performances and special effects. So, what was 1983 at the movies? It was the perfect storm of sequels that were basically full-blown events, outlandish surprises, and emotional heavy hitters. It showed that Hollywood could be big and loud, but also touching and heartbreaking when it wanted to. And more than anything, it proved that cinema in the 80s was not just about entertainment. It was about creating experiences that audiences couldn't get anywhere else. If 1981 and 1982 laid the groundwork, 1983 was the year music planted a flag with glitter all over it and said, "This is the 80s, deal with it." Pop, rock, R&B, and new wave were all fighting for dominance, and instead of canceling each other out, they fueled one another. Let's start with the elephant in the room with the sequined glove, Michael Jackson. Thriller had technically dropped at the end of 1982, but 1983 was the year it swallowed the world whole. The Thriller album gave us hit after hit, with songs like Billie Jean, Beat It, and of course the title track, with that 14-minute mini horror movie of a music video. MTV played Thriller on repeat. Michael Jackson performed the Moonwalk on Motown's 25th anniversary special, and suddenly every kid in America was trying to glide backwards across their kitchen floor. Michael Jackson wasn't just the biggest star of 1983, he was really the blueprint for what a pop star could be. Michael Jackson wasn't the only one out there changing the game. Madonna dropped her self-titled debut album this year. While it didn't explode quite as fast as Thriller, it planted the seeds of her soon-to-be global takeover, with songs like Holiday and Borderline. Her mix of dance pop and provocative styles started making waves in clubs and on MTV. Madonna wasn't just singing. She was creating her image and how she wanted to portray not only herself, but her art, and people everywhere were definitely paying attention. On the rock side, the Police were riding high with Every Breath You Take, a song often mistaken for a love ballad, but actually it's a stalker tune that's kind of hidden in a misleading romantic number. It became the year's biggest hit single and turned Sting into a sullen, pensive rock poet sex symbol. Meanwhile, David Bowie reinvented himself yet again with Let's Dance. Between the title track and China Girl, David Bowie went from avant-garde art rocker to mainstream MTV darling, seemingly overnight, thanks to collaborations with Nile Rodgers and a young Stevie Ray Vaughan. Prince was also soaring high, teasing what would become his Purple Rain era with the 1983 release of his album 1999. The singles still completely take over the radio and dance floors to this day. His mix of funk, rock, and sexuality was something MTV couldn't ignore, no matter how much it tried to downplay Black artists early on. By the end of the year, Prince wasn't just a rising star. He was a cultural force. No exaggeration. He was the catalyst for change, and he made an impact globally in many ways beyond his music. Now, let's talk about the gossip in the music industry. Diana Ross made headlines not just for her music, but for her diva conduct. For example, she would storm out of events, feud with Motown, and at one infamous Central Park concert, she performed in a thunderstorm that left thousands soaked before the show had to be called off. It only seemed to prove her reputation was both unstoppable and unpredictable. Then there was David Lee Roth of Van Halen. His antics off the stage with groupies and hotel rooms were the stuff of rock lore. The band's hit album 1984 was just around the corner, but in 1983, their parties were already so notorious that hotels allegedly banned them in advance. Elsewhere, Culture Club with Boy George were shaking up gender norms on MTV with Karma Chameleon and Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? Boy George's androgynous look fascinated all the tabloids. Some celebrated it, others mocked it, but no one ignored it. He was bringing conversations about sexuality and identity into mainstream living rooms, even if he didn't always get the credit for it. And let's not forget the softer side. Lionel Richie crooning all night long had everybody swaying, while Billy Joel's Uptown Girl was an ode to Christy Brinkley, who he would later marry. They were the embodiment of couples who seemed to be a force to be reckoned with. Music in '83 wasn't just sound, it was a pure spectacle, had a lot of personality, and sometimes it was really scandalous. From Michael moonwalking into superstardom to Madonna staking her claim as pop's next provocateur, to Bowie, Prince, and Boy George, all making the world reimagine what an artist could look and sound like, the year was a kaleidoscope of rebirth. The charts were booming, the gossip columns were buzzing, and what used to be the norm was shifting one neon beat at a time. Of the Billboard year-end Hot 100 singles of 1983, these are the top 10. Coming in at number 1, Every Breath You Take by The Police. The ultimate stalker ballad, disguised as a wedding song, played at 1,000 first dances by people who never actually listened to the lyrics. Number 2, Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. The song that turned sidewalks into imaginary light-up tiles. It also gave us the single most iconic live TV moonwalk in history. Coming in at number 3, Flashdance, What a Feeling by Irene Cara. Part empowerment anthem, part aerobic workout jam. Nobody could hear this and not want to leap into the air in their leg warmers. Number 4, Down Under by Men at Work. A flute riff, Vegemite sandwiches, and a chorus that made Australia sound like a magical, slightly dangerous wonderland. Number 5, Michael Jackson comes in again with Beat It. Eddie Van Halen's guitar solo melted faces, while Jackson reminded everyone that sometimes the toughest thing you can do is run away. Coming in at number 6, Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler. Melodramatic, over-the-top, gothic romance vibes. Basically a soap opera in song form. Cue the dramatic wind machine. Number 7, Maneater by Daryl Hall and John Oates. Proof that the 80s could make paranoia about women sound downright funky. Number 8, Baby Come to Me by Patty Austin and James Ingram. A silky duet that got a second life thanks to General Hospital. Soap operas, launching careers since forever. Number 9, Maniac by Michael Sembello. Another Flashdance anthem. If you weren't kicking invisible walls in your living room when this played, were you even alive in 1983? Coming in at number 10, Sweet Dreams Are Made of This by the Eurythmics. Annie Lennox's voice plus synths equal icy perfection. Also, the soundtrack to about 1 million slow-motion montages in people's minds. Now let's get into the Billboard year-end Top 10 albums of 1983. Number 1, Michael Jackson's Thriller. Not just the album of the year, the album of the decade, maybe of all time. Zombies, sequined gloves, and pop perfection. Coming in at number 2, The Police with Synchronicity. Sting's broodiness set to sharp experimental rock. Proof that a breakup album can also make millions. Number 3, the Flashdance soundtrack. 1 movie, 2 top 10 singles, and a legacy of gym-inspired fashion choices. Coming in at number 4, Men at Work's Business as Usual. Australia officially exports more than kangaroos and Crocodile Dundee. Number 5, David Bowie's Let's Dance. Nile Rodgers gave Bowie the dance makeover that no one knew they needed. Suddenly, David Bowie was cool at the club. Number 6, Styx's album, Kilroy Was Here. The concept album that brought us Mr. Roboto. Equal parts futuristic, theatrical, and weirdly catchy. Number 7, Bryan Adams' Cuts Like a Knife. Canadian rock ballads never cut so deep. This was just a warm-up for his true global takeover later in the decade. Coming in at number 8, ZZ Top with Eliminator. Beards, hot rods, and MTV-ready videos. Proof that blues rock could still hang in a neon world. Number 9, Journey with Frontiers. More arena anthems for lighters in the air moments. Don't Stop Believin' was still echoing. And number 10, Lionel Richie with his self-titled album. Smooth, soulful, and absolutely everywhere. Lionel was setting up for Hello to haunt us all in 1984. 1983 felt a little like Hollywood had mixtaped the tabloids and the front page and then hit repeat. Big personalities, bigger headlines, and scandals that either sparked outrage or sold out arenas. Here are the stories that people were whispering about in cocktail lounges, at copy machines, and at the dinner table. If there was a single celebrity story that completely took over casual conversation in 1983, it was Michael Jackson. His Motown 25 performance is where he famously debuted the moonwalk on TV. It instantly became a phenomenon and turned him into a cross-generational sensation, sending fans scrambling to copy the move. The Thriller album that he'd released in 1982 continued its unstoppable run through 1983, turning every Michael Jackson appearance into must-see TV and every small eccentricity into tabloid fodder. People watched him the way they watch comets that are beautiful, a little mystifying, and impossible to ignore. Princess Diana's existence was already kind of a global soap opera. By 1983, the newly minted Princess of Wales had the world's attention for everything from fashion choices to childhood charities, and the tabloids were relentless and harsh. Even when she tried to keep parts of her life private, the press found a way in. Palace staff later admitted that Princess Diana did a lot of times want to know what was being said about her in magazines, newspapers, and gossip rags. The royal couple's tours, which included a high-profile 1983 tour, were major field days for the media. Lady Di was welcomed by crowds, sometimes a magnet for protest, gossip, and endless coverage that would intensify through the decade. What I'm about to share with you reads like the worst kind of industry horror story. We touched on it a little in 1982's episode. If you missed it, the deadly Twilight Zone movie accident on July 23, 1982, killed actor Vic Morrow and two child actors during a pyrotechnics-heavy helicopter shoot. That tragedy still echoed through 1983 as investigations, lawsuits, and stunned industry chatter started to spread. The incident didn't just cast a shadow on other stories by taking over the headlines, it forced Hollywood to confront on-set safety, child labor rules, and who was responsible when trying to do something wild to attract attention or for shock went too far. For gossip pages, it was grim because it was a different kind of scandal. Not one about a hot celebrity fling, but one about the costs of chasing excitement. The tabloids loved any famous coupling, and the brief, intense marriage of Carrie Fisher and Paul Simon, who married in 1983 and would divorce the next year, was exactly the kind of romantic headline that sold papers. Their relationship was messy, public, and later described by both parties as ill-timed. It fed songs, interviews, and the kind of gossip that turns into creative inspiration. Paul Simon later referred to this period of his life as, quote, mistakes on top of mistakes. It made for juicy copy because both were big names and complicated people from very different worlds, one being a rock/pop star and the other a blockbuster film actress. Some celebrity drama in 1982 to 83 blurred the lines between industry and showbiz. John DeLorean's arrest in an undercover sting tied to alleged cocaine trafficking was less a Hollywood tabloid story and more a soap opera about money, ambition, and tendencies for being wrong and screwing up. but it played in the celebrity pages because John DeLorean had the charm and the car, the DMC-12, that looked like it should have been in a movie. The case stayed in the headlines into the next year until his later acquittal. Either way, it fed the era's appetite for big personalities who failed miserably. A few celebrities of 1983 were gossip magnets simply because they were everywhere. As we know, Eddie Murphy exploded into movie stardom with Trading Places, and suddenly the SNL stars' off-screen life, like dates, parties, and rumored feuds, became as interesting as his on-screen swagger. Joan Collins' Dynasty glamour was still a weekly fashion headline and a tabloid favorite. Madonna's debut was the beginning of her creating music and playing with her image. Her sexuality and brashness made entertainment writers itch with curiosity and moralizers extremely unhappy and offended. Such a perfect cocktail for ongoing gossip. These were not legal scandals so much as relentless public scrutiny. How they dressed, who they dated, and what they said became part of the story. If there's a connective tissue to all of this, it's simple. 1983 was when the press and the public began to see that celebrity was clickbait gold. Paparazzi culture was growing, gossip magazines were booming, and the idea that personal turmoil could be monetized by photographers, papers, and TV was hardly controversial anymore. That meant even small incidents could blow up into overnight controversy. The era created an appetite. Readers wanted intimate detail, and editorial pages were all too willing to supply it. That dynamic framed how stars behaved. Sometimes they would perform for the press. Other times, they'd prefer to hide from them. 1983 didn't whisper when it came to fashion. It shouted, strutted, and sparkled. Clothing was not just fabric. It was identity, rebellion, and a billboard for culture. Between the catwalk, MTV, and everyday closets, style became a global conversation. Sure, MTV was changing music, but it was also changing wardrobes. Suddenly, millions of kids wanted to copy the styles of the music stars. Madonna's layered lace, fishnet gloves, crucifix jewelry, and messy curls made her the high priestess of street style. Cyndi Lauper's clash of neon, tutus, and dyed hair said fashion could be fun, chaotic, and unapologetic. Michael Jackson's red leather jacket from Thriller and his glittering single glove were just costumes at first, but they became pop culture artifacts, instantly imitated by teenagers in malls everywhere. In offices all over, style tilted toward the sharp edges of ambition. Women were steadily stepping into corporate roles in higher numbers, and their wardrobes reflected it with, yes, the broad shoulder pads still, double-breasted jackets, and cinched waists. The power suit became a uniform of both defiance and professionalism. Meanwhile, men were not left behind. Armani was making it known that sleek masculinity with softer, unstructured suits carried just enough swagger to move between the boardroom and the nightclub. Hollywood's glow made wardrobes aspirational. Dynasty and Dallas gave the world a taste of money chic, with sequins, big hair, and gowns that dripped in status. On the other end, Flashdance was redefining casual wear, and suddenly leg warmers and off-the-shoulder sweatshirts weren't gym clothes, they were fashion statements. It was a year where you might wear a pinstripe suit Monday through Friday, then rock a cut-up sweatshirt to the club on Saturday. The sidewalks were just as stylish as the catwalks. Breakdancers and hip-hop crews in New York were pioneering looks that would later dominate streetwear. There were Adidas tracksuits, Kangol hats, oversized gold chains, and pristine sneakers. Meanwhile, punks held on to their spikes, leather jackets, and DIY ethic, clashing with the bright color explosion of new wave kids who wore neon, geometric prints, and asymmetrical cuts. Subcultures were badges of inclusion. Hair in 1983 had one rule: the higher the better. Hairspray was practically a necessity. Women teased and sprayed their hair into sky-high styles, often paired with streaks of daring color. Men experimented, too, with mullets. Oh yeah, mullets were at their peak, from rock stars to regular guys. Makeup leaned bold. Remember the electric blue eyeshadow, heavy blush, and glossy lips, often paired with earrings that could double as wind chimes. Subtlety was dead. Fashion houses rode the wave. Gianni Versace was pushing bold colors, wild prints, and sexy cuts that felt rebellious against conservative tailoring. Calvin Klein was the definition of minimal, logo-driven cool, especially in denim and underwear campaigns. Ralph Lauren was serving up aspirational Americana with polos and prep. It gave a softer contrast to the louder styles taking over the clubs and television. Designer labels were not hidden. They were status symbols that were flashed proudly, likely somewhere on your clothes for all to see. For the average person, 1983 fashion meant options. Malls were poppin' and profitable. Fast fashion cycles sped up, and clothes became more accessible. Teenagers were experimenting with layering and mixing athletic wear with secondhand finds. Parents clung to some 70s leftovers. Think brown polyester, while kids would tear it apart for punk or new wave reinvention. The generational divide showed up in closets as much as it did at the dinner table. Fashion was definitely loud in 1983, but toys were possibly even louder. They were bright, sometimes annoying for parents, and designed to keep kids glued to Saturday morning cartoons because the commercials were too enticing for kids to ignore. Kids everywhere were like, "Oh, I need that, and I want that too." At the same time, video games were hitting their first identity crisis, leaving toy aisles and arcades in chaos. First up, the undisputed king of the toy box, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. These weren't just action figures. Oh no, these were tiny steroid sculptures, each one standing about 5.5 inches tall and ripped to shreds. He-Man, Teela, and Man-at-Arms were the good guys, but let's be real, Skeletor stole the show. His crew of weirdos included Beastman, Trapjaw, who had a robo-arm and interchangeable jaws, and Merman, who looked like somebody's science project gone horribly wrong. And then there was Castle Grayskull. If you didn't have it, you were definitely jealous of the kid who did. It was a fold-out fortress with a dungeon, weapons rack, and a drawbridge that clacked open like the gates of destiny. And don't forget the cartoon. Mattel basically hacked childhood by cranking out 65 episodes in one season, all just to sell these toys. And admit it, you still remember the chant, "I have the power." Probably screamed from the top of your bunk bed in your underwear. Pets everywhere were traumatized. Next up, G.I. Joe, a real American hero. Forget those stiff, old 12-inch dolls. By 1983, the Joes had shrunk to a handy 3.75 inches, and they could bend in ways your own knees never could. Duke, Scarlet, and the silent ninja Snake Eyes battled Cobra Commander, the Baroness, and Destro, the shiny-head villain who looked like he'd lost a bet at a chrome shop. And the vehicles, these weren't just toys. They were engineering marvels. The Mobat tank, the Sky Striker jet, basically Hot Wheels, if Hot Wheels came armed to the teeth. And who can forget the PSAs? Quote, "Knowing is half the battle." Yeah, right. The other half was begging your mom for just one more figure at Kmart. And then Star Wars. Kenner was still riding high off Return of the Jedi. If a character just blinked for 3 seconds on the screen, it had a figure on the shelves. There was the Ewok Village, which is a giant treehouse playset, Jabba's throne room, with a working trapdoor that usually fed figures straight to the family dog, and the speeder bike, which exploded into pieces at the push of a button. Oh, come on, you know you pushed it 1,000 times. Today, mint condition Ewoks are worth thousands. Back then, they were just one more thing your parents stepped on in the carpet. Now, if action figures were not your jam, maybe you were on the softer side of things. Enter the Cabbage Patch Kids, designed by Xavier Roberts. They didn't come in a box. You adopted them, complete with a certificate that basically turned playtime into a legal proceeding. By Christmas of '83, parents were straight up brawling in toy aisles for these dolls. News cameras caught middle-aged moms tackling strangers. Retail turned into the Hunger Games. The price tag? Around $25 to $30 retail, but scalpers were reselling them for 3 times that. Welcome to the first ever toy apocalypse. Black Friday chaos has these yarn-haired babies to thank. If you wanted something cuddlier, you had the Care Bears. Pastel plushies with tummy symbols like rainbows, suns, rain clouds that taught us the world's biggest problems could be solved with a hug. Sweet, right? Until you realized they doubled as weapons in pillow fights. And then there was Strawberry Shortcake. These dolls smelled. On purpose. Strawberry smelled like strawberries, lemon meringue smelled like lemons, you get it. But here's the thing, making toys smell edible meant every kid tried licking one. And don't lie, you did too. Now let's move on to the great divide of childhood, Hot Wheels versus Matchbox. Hot Wheels were bright, wild, and defied physics on their orange tracks. They launched through loops across ramps and directly into your dog's water bowl. Matchbox cars, on the other hand, were realistic, like your dad's station wagon in miniature form. Families were seriously torn apart over this divide. Were you a thrill seeker or a suburban realist? Meanwhile, in Japan, something incredible was brewing. Pre-Transformers. Toys from the Microman and Diaclone lines were already turning into trucks, planes, and yes, guns. Hasbro spotted them, slapped new names on them, and by 1984, Optimus Prime and Megatron were household names. Somewhere in Tokyo, a kid was snapping off Megatron's arm while an American exec whispered, "We're gonna be rich." Now, here's where things get interesting. The Atari 2600 was still king at the start of '83. A joystick and a single red button. That's all you needed for Pitfall or Asteroids. But then came E.T., the infamous game rushed out in 5 weeks. It was so bad, so broken, that millions of unsold copies literally ended up in a New Mexico landfill. And with that, the video game crash of '83 was born. Parents cheered, kids were forced back outside to play, and for a brief moment, bicycles outsold joysticks. Very, very brief. Because meanwhile, in Japan, Nintendo was quietly plotting a comeback. The family computer, better known as the Famicom, launched in July of '83. It was sleek, powerful, and came with Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers. 2 years later, it hit the US as the NES and completely rescued gaming as we know it. And oh yeah, Sega tried too. The SG-1000 launched the exact same day as the Famicom. The problem was Nintendo just steamrolled them. Think of it like Pepsi launching the same day Coke invented world domination. And for families who didn't have a console or whose parents didn't trust those violent video games, there were always board games. Trivial Pursuit hit big in 1983. It started in Canada, spread like wildfire, and within a couple of years, 20 million copies were sold. Families everywhere were testing who had the most useless knowledge, and nothing caused a screaming match faster than Dad insisting his technically correct answer counted. And of course, the classics were still there. Monopoly, Clue, Sorry, Uno. By this point, these weren't just games. They were endurance tests, and they usually ended with someone storming off, a flipped board, or an unspoken family grudge that lasted for years. So there you have it, the toy and game aisles of 1983. Muscle-bound heroes, plush therapy bears, dolls that started riots, cars that divided families, robots in disguise, video games that crashed and burned, and board games that destroyed family unity. All right, let's see what technology had in store for us in 1983. This was the year of brick phones, computers fighting for space on your kitchen desk, the very first camcorder to immortalize bad dance moves, and oh yeah, the internet technically started existing, though nobody cared. Let's take a tour. First up, the Motorola Dynatac 8000X, the world's first commercially available cell phone. Picture this, a giant plastic brick, 10 inches of antenna sticking out of the top, weighing about 2.5 pounds. The battery gave you maybe 30 minutes of talk time before it wheezed out, and then it needed 10 hours to recharge. The price? A very casual $3,995. That's $11,000 today. But if you were a Wall Street shark in '83, you wanted to be seen screaming into this thing on the beach. The calls were not important. The flex was. It was a status symbol, a neon sign that said, "I have money and poor upper body strength from lugging this thing around." Now let's talk about the battle for your home desk space. Apple launched the Lisa computer in 1983, one of the first with a graphical user interface. You could actually point, click, and drag with a mouse instead of memorizing arcane commands. Revolutionary. The problem? The Lisa cost $10,000, so, not exactly flying off the shelves. Meanwhile, Commodore 64 was the computer your neighbor's kid had, with colorful graphics and sound. It turned bedrooms into arcades and classrooms into coding lessons. Affordable at about $595, it became the people's computer. Millions sold, mostly to kids who swore they were learning BASIC, but were definitely just playing Pac-Man. And then IBM dropped its PC XT. All business, all beige, all serious. If the Commodore was fun, the IBM was spreadsheets. Apple was dreaming about the future. IBM locked down the office. And Commodore just wanted you to have fun at home. Sony gave us the Betamovie BMC 100p, the world's first consumer camcorder. Suddenly, families could capture birthday parties, Christmas mornings, or, let's be honest, Dad's terrible karaoke attempts. There was a catch, though. It only recorded in Betamax, a format that would lose the war to VHS. But in 1983, it didn't matter. The camcorder meant awkward home movies were officially born. Somewhere in a box in someone's attic, a grainy 1983 recording still exists of a breakdancing attempt that really should have stayed forgotten. By 1983, the Sony Walkman, it was a major shift in society. The WM10 model came out, tiny, sleek, and foldable. Teenagers everywhere suddenly had a way to shut out their parents and the world. Joggers ran with foam headphones bouncing on their heads. Students sulked to the police, and every bus ride turned into a private concert. Parents worried it was isolating. Kids loved it because it was isolating. And just like that, the soundtrack of the 80s became portable. And finally, while you were busy adopting a Cabbage Patch Kid, something quietly revolutionary flickered on. On January 1st, 1983, the ARPANET, ARPANET, switched to a new system called TCP/IP. It's the backbone of the modern internet. Without it, no Instagram, no TikTok, no memes, no cat videos. Who noticed? Nerds, scientists, a few government contractors. That's about it. But this boring, invisible shift is the reason you can now listen to podcasts about 1983 while scrolling through your phone. If you told someone back then that this protocol change would one day lead to their grandkids posting dance videos for strangers on the internet, they'd have laughed you right out of Radio Shack. So that was tech in 1983, from bricks you could barely lift, to Walkmans that changed how we listen, to the internet quietly being born in the background. Some of it changed the world forever. Some of it ended up in a landfill in New Mexico. Either way, 1983 was a reminder that in tech, you never really know what's going to last and what's going to be an embarrassing relic collecting dust in your attic. So that was 1983, a year where TV got smarter, movies went bigger, celebrities kept the tabloids busy, and toys and tech gave us brand new ways to be entertained. From the living room to the arcade to the very first bricks of the digital world, 1983 was proof that the future was already sneaking in while everyone was distracted by a talking car and a batch of adopted dolls. That's it for today's trip through the Pop Culture Diary. Thanks for tuning in and taking a trip back in time for a hit of nostalgia with me. Don't forget to follow the podcast wherever you get your shows, rate, review, and keep an eye out for the podcast on social media over on Instagram at the Pop Culture Diary Podcast, Twitter at Pop Cult Diary Pod, Tumblr at the Pop Culture Diary Podcast, and the Facebook page, The Pop Culture Diary, for more pop culture fun, extras, and behind-the-scenes madness. Until next time, everyone take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next episode.